I feel like I'm a product of the environment that I grew up in. My father and mother were violent. That violence was a regular and almost predictable occurrence. I didn't think of it as abuse. I must have done something wrong.
How were you able to break that cycle within the family context?
There's only two things I can do, law or politics. I just saw that as the only way out of Weber Street.
Was there any discussion in 1995 around mental health or the mental well-being of lawyers?
The lawyers that spoke about it didn't practice law anymore. As a result of it, the pursuit of success wasn't going to be the pursuit of happiness. I should abandon the pursuit of happiness and instead try to find meaning in my life.
Why now? Why did you decide to write this book now?
So
Welcome back to another episode of Who Judges the Judge, the podcast intended to make you question the way you judge the world around you. And today's guest, I think, will do just that and a little bit more. I'm here today with Orlando de Silva. Orlando is an accomplished lawyer of over 30 years. He was the president of the Ontario Bar Association. He is still practicing with the ministry, and he is a mental health advocate who truly opened the door to talk about mental health in the legal profession and has literally changed the way this conversation has happened across the country. He has recently written a book called Thank God I Failed, and I finished it yesterday, and it was one of the most, if not the most challenging books that I have read in a long time. It was so beautifully written, so articulate. It took me on your journey in ways that I wasn't expecting and to such a dark place, but doesn't keep you in that darkness in a way that it allowed me to get through it. But I can tell you, I had to do it in small chunks and read most of it, quite frankly, outside just to have a little bit of light to balance out those dark areas. Honestly, this is an incredible journey, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast to share your insights, your perspective, and also the hope that you offer in this book. Like when I ended the read, that level of hope that you give and the insights you give into the journey of someone who has battled depression since childhood is truly phenomenal. So I want to thank you for the book. I want to thank you for the conversation. I want to thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for the invitation and for taking time to read that my memoir there. I know it's a hard read, but my hope is that the hope is in the pages along with the darkness. And ultimately, when you finish it, you realize that you can carry a lot of the weight of things like depression and anxiety and trauma and still have very much a reason to live and hope for a meaningful and rewarding professional and personal life.
Absolutely. And you have both. You've managed
Yeah.
to find a way to not just live, but to thrive.
Yeah, I've done my best not to let the worst parts of my myself, which would be in my case depression, treatment resistant depression, to be an impediment to the fullest life I could pursue. And my life has been messy, as you could see from the book, but I think most lives are messy in some way, and I think it's important to reveal that to people and still say, it need not be something that holds you back, but in some ways, a reason to feel motivated or um, a reason to feel that you're not different from others, and you can still succeed in some definition of that. Um, but as you know, it's for me, it's not like a neat, happy ending. It's a continuing struggle. And it continues and will continue to be something that I have to deal with. That is to say, the depression for likely the rest of my life. But I try to explain how I've been shaped by it, how I try to address it when it arrives, how my family helps me, and how all of this makes me feel both loved and worthwhile. And that gives me self worth, and self worth gives me hope. And hope is the only thing I've found that cures my depression.
And I mean, I want to touch on something you said, that your life is messy. I think all of our lives are messy in some form or fashion for the most part. For me, I think what's most important is when you can find meaning in that mess. And I feel like, your book and the work that you did leading up to this book in terms of, you know, pulling the Band-Aid off the secrecy in this profession, and you speak about that a lot in your book, has been truly incredible, and that's where the real meaning has been beyond just what you've accomplished in your own life, which is, amazing, but what you give to others and what you're able to give to others, through the work that you first did with the OBA, the Ontario Bar Association, in terms of just having the conversation. Like, when you were at sort of, I guess your would you call it your bottom? When with the first time you tried to kill yourself and were
Yeah, it
hospitalized?
would have been 2008. Yeah, the bottom of some might call it the nadir of the arc of my life at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, looking back on your life, do you see that as your sort of the bottom that had you starting to crawl out or look for ways to cope with your depression?
It depends on how you look at what a bottom is, because the mood that I experienced on that night, I had felt before.
Okay.
And the pain of it is so intense that it's almost impossible to describe in words. And that December 18th, 2008 was a day where I had sort of the means, a newly filled prescription of medication that was more than enough, and the complete absence of hope. So I suppose the opportunity. I don't know that they ever before or since combined in such a way to make those conditions perfect, if you will, for acting on that hopelessness. But the absolute pain of it was something I've felt many times before and have felt since, and will probably feel again in the future. Almost dying on that night gave me a chance to do some reflecting and healing and get some help that gave me a sense of, a better sense of myself and what I could do. And it was in those dark times that I realized that, the pursuit of success wasn't going to be the pursuit of happiness. That in fact, I should abandon the pursuit of happiness and instead try to find meaning in my life. And that meaning comes much more from, the work that I've done since the Ontario Bar Association in this space, this mental health advocacy space for lawyers and others, than anything on my CV.
The pursuit of success versus the pursuit of happiness as opposed to the two coinciding. It's such an interesting way to frame it because I think for most of us, we see the two as interchangeable.
And I did too. Like it was always for me the thought of if I think back to law school, success to me was simply, at one point it was getting into law school. Then
Right.
I thought, well, then I'd be set, right? I'd be a lawyer and I'd be set. But the goal always changed. Then it became some achievement at law school, and then notably grades and other things. But then landing a job at the right firm, which for me changed from wanting to be what you do, a criminal defense lawyer. That was my dream. I then allowed others to define success for me, which at my law school was more, be a Bay Street lawyer and then a partner. But each time, I achieved that success, the closest analogy I can think of is like having meeting someone for the first time that you met online, and then being disappointed because they don't meet your expectations and not what you
Wow.
thought, you know? So success for whatever it was, when I achieved it, it sat uncomfortably with me, and I realized that what I enjoyed most was striving for the next thing. And quickly you find your career just follows that path. Never quite satisfied with where you are, using that to motivate you to the next step. And I think until you realize that the journey is what is the rewarding part, and that journey has to have meaning, not you know for others, for at least in my case, for it to be meaningful to me, then you may be perpetually discontented. Um, and so I tried to adjust my outlook and search for ways to feel worthwhile to others because I'm always fighting this sense within me that I'm not worthwhile as a person, that I don't have worth as a human being. And the worth then comes from outside validation. But achieving partnership or a certain net worth or, whatever it is that you aspire to has never been able to fill that sense of meaning for me. So it doesn't motivate me much anymore. It comes as a result of pursuing, I think, the meaning that your life has for you, however you define it. But it's important to understand what it is you want to do for others while you're here.
Powerful for sure. And I definitely want to circle back. I think for anyone who hasn't read the book, doesn't know your journey, I have a lot of listeners who aren't in law, who, I think everyone in law, or I feel like everyone in law knows at least a little bit about some of the work that you've done as a front runner, for mental health advocacy in the profession. But for those who haven't read the book, could you just do like a Cole's Notes overview? Because your story, is so powerful, not only in the advocacy that you do, but where you came from. You describe it, yourself as the boy from Weber Street, in Kitchener. What did that look like in terms of, again, just as a rough overview of your childhood and what it took for you to get to law school? Because that was sort of the first struggle, was that journey to overcome and to move beyond, you know, how you've encountered the boy from Weber.
Yeah, that for me was the hardest part to write, I think, in the book because I had to think back at stuff that I just, for me, was ancient history, but evidently shaped me into who I was and how I perceived my place in the world. So, I grew up in a you might charitably call it a dysfunctional family of sorts. My father and mother were violent toward each other when they got angry, which was quite a lot, possibly and likely fueled by alcohol. In hindsight. And that violence was a regular and almost predictable occurrence in the home that led, in its worst cases, to my brothers. I have two younger brothers, and mostly my middle brother and I, separating my father and mother. Um, my father was much stronger than my mom, and sometimes, we'd have to break them up because he was kicking her while she was on the floor, and those are some of the first, memories I have of living on Weaver Street in Kitchener, in a house that was largely neglected. Because my father was, not really engaged with us as a family for reasons that are never clear to me. But I have a hypothesis that possibly it's because his family was convinced I wasn't really his son. Time may prove me wrong there. Um, but the violence also was directed, I suppose, towards the children, but mostly to me. I think my brothers would say they had a very different experience. My middle brother, Walter, wasn't, for example, hit as much as I was, and Victor, my youngest, wasn't at all. The hitting was more than simply a 1970s style of corporal discipline, but the result of an uncontrolled rage, often, I think, fueled by alcohol and maybe frustration with my father's life, but his own life. But it was unpredictable, and that unpredictability made the house a very tense place to be. And, I don't like using the word violence. I never thought of it as trauma or abuse and still have some discomfort labeling my childhood in that way. But, there are examples in the book where, my brother and I were whipped with extension cords. My dad used to sucker punch me sometimes, for reasons that I just never understood. And had to find out later, like clanking my dishes too loudly once for not opening a garbage bag wide enough for him, and I just get punched in the face. That made me extremely vigilant, along with my brothers in the home, to changes in mood or what I would describe as the weather, but never felt to me like it was anything more than I deserved. I didn't think of it as abuse. I must have done something wrong.
Right.
My mother was less physical, but in the way she affected me in particular, but was in a tough marriage, obviously, different cultures. My dad was immigrated from Portugal. My mom was from Nova Scotia. They didn't speak English together because my dad couldn't at the time, so they tried in French. But there was all kinds of cultural differences that meant that she wasn't very welcome by the larger my father's side of the family. All of which is to say that there were a lot of reasons for her to, treat me the way she did. And one of the defining things that I remember is being kicked out of the house at 5 years old and wandering the streets, wondering where to turn. Her telling me that the sight of me made her want to throw up. And I thought, I deserve this, obviously. Where am I going to sleep? Where am I going to eat? And if my mom thinks of me this way, it must, first of all, it must be true. And secondly, what hope do I have with a stranger, right? Who's going to take me in? Should always go back. Should always let me in. But the pattern repeated itself until maybe I was 16 or something like that. By the time I was 19, my father had passed away, and I was off to university and never really returned to Weber Street, as it were. But there's a lot more to it than that. That's the Cole's notes of it, and having read the book, maybe there are details you'd want me to talk about
No,
more.
it's
But
it's more
yeah,
just to really show the journey that it was. I think that there's still this, misconception with the legal profession that we're all private school educated from privileged backgrounds, and the more people I speak to in the profession, the more it becomes very obvious that that's not the case, and that even those who are coming from some of the most what you've called dysfunctional, what many would call, abusive, neglectful, impoverished homes, still can find their way into a school, and including those as prestigious as the University of Toronto, which is where I understand you attended. And so your path into university at the outset was a difficult one. And having read the book, obviously, I know that you now have a fantastic, family support. You're happily married. You have 2 stepdaughters and your own daughter. How were you able to break that cycle within the family context? Because what we often see, and especially, as a criminal defense lawyer, we see intergenerational trauma as repeating itself until there's something to interrupt the cycle. And it's such an important, task to interrupt for everyone, especially the next generation.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and one I've asked myself because we talked about success, but really my proudest accomplishment is breaking that cycle. You know, so I'm nothing like my parents in that way. I've never lifted a hand to anybody, and um, I'm calm, soft spoken, and sometimes I don't know, a little too quiet. And that surprises people who have a stereotype for what, they think lawyers, especially litigators, should be. And I asked myself, how did I do it? And I can't remember a day where I woke up and said, I'm just not going to. It was more like, I don't want to treat people badly. I don't want them to feel the kind of pain I felt. I don't know if I even made that kind of logical connection in my head,
Did
but
you always feel that way? Like when you think about your earlier relationships, even like as a teenager and in your 20s and your 30s, like as you were growing up, because it's not common to see that thread being broken, especially for someone who's coming from a home that was so violent and so volatile. Like the violence, as you said, wasn't connected to anything that you did wrong. It's not like you brought home a bad report card and all of a sudden you're getting knocked around for it. It was sudden and unexpected, and it was just a part of the lifestyle. So, I know people who have broken that intergenerational cycle, but they usually do it after, years and years of therapy and trying to do what's needed, or they recess into themselves, and either don't have relationships or don't have healthy ones. But
I,
like,
I,
what's the how for you that you were able to do that?
I wish I could offer an easy answer to that, but there really isn't. I don't have an addictive personality, and so I do get angry like everyone does, but it never reaches the point where I want to hit somebody. You know, when I was younger, I'd have to defend myself, and the good thing about growing up the way I did is I learned I could take a punch and I wasn't made of glass. So that meant I didn't have the fear that others might have when backed into a corner and threatened physically. That's often sometimes a bad thing too, because you're not aware of what others might be carrying to hurt you. But I've never reached a point of anger where I thought that anger would be relieved in any way by acting out physically or making someone feel so small and insignificant that their life isn't worthwhile. I think maybe because I never really was a drinker, I didn't get into drugs. I don't have an addictive personality, so I didn't have that to fuel the temper or to blur the lines of what seemed appropriate at the time, that might have helped. But also, fundamentally, I always thought that whatever happened to me, I deserved. But I couldn't see anyone around me who deserved the same.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't know that I would have acted if I did in that way. But it just, you deserve as a human being not to feel the pain that I felt and define myself by. But I do. And that was an incongruity that I had then and continue to have now. Like to say trauma and abuse about my childhood is something that doesn't sit well with me. Although I've written about it, people have told me that's what it was. There's still a fundamental part of me that says, you deserved that. And any parent in that situation would have done the same. And be grateful you had a roof over your head, and the opportunity to become who you are. and stop whining about it.
Do you take credit for the person that you became?
No, no, I don't. I feel like I'm a product of what the environment that I grew up in, you know?
Really? Even still, because I mean, you earned scholarships, you earned awards to get yourself to university, to get yourself to law school, through law school, earned a coveted spot on Bay Street for articling, which anyone who isn't in the legal profession listening is, especially in some of the top law schools, is pushed to us as being sort of the pinnacle of what you do as an articling student. Um, and so you earned that.
Yeah, well,
Do you attribute like your hard work and tenacity for those achievements?
I don't think you can achieve that without persistence and hard work. But I don't congratulate myself for that, because what I needed, I was lucky enough to get. And that is, throughout different moments in my life, sometimes at exactly the right moment, there was a mentor or someone or a teacher who said, in not so many words, I see a potential there that this boy doesn't see in himself.
When you heard that, did you see the potential? Like when someone else said to you along the way, like, you have potential, was there a glimmer that said, "Oh yeah, I see that"?
No,
No.
not until I started seeing some success, like in high school.
Okay.
Well, my dad called me useless, right? I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this
Oh my
show.
god, yes. You can say anything you want. This is my place away from court. So we can open it up to real conversations
Okay.
that matter.
It's
So,
important because it's how I define myself, right?
yes.
When your parents say this, or in my case, my dad, is that I was a useless asshole. Okay, couldn't do anything right. He was good with his hands. He was an artist. He a mechanic. He could build homes. He could do everything but take care of our house, which was falling,
Literally falling apart.
falling apart. It was not structurally sound, but he had checked out from that. Anyway, I could do none of those things. And he came from, Portugal under Salazar's regime, where school and academics for a man was something that was unmasculine, you know. What you had to do was prove your worth, by being a bricklayer, a carpenter, a welder, something that added, something identifiably concrete to the value of society. And the harder you worked, the more valuable you were. And what he saw in me was sort of like a useless, lazy kid. And his answer for me then was to compel me to take violin lessons, which I did, knowing that the consequences of saying no were pretty grave. And I did that, and the reasoning was that at least I could play on some street corner, and someone would give me change if I played well enough, and I would always have enough to eat, he thought. So I thought that's the best I can do. When it came then to grade 8 or so, and I was asked, like, got to fill out the forms for high school, and I was offered, the whole range I saw in the form was between basic, then general, then advanced, and then they had this special gifted program, and I put myself in basic. I thought that's where I belong. I'm not smart enough for anything else.
Meanwhile.
Well, meanwhile, that's one of those moments where, like Mrs. Forrester in grade 4, who saw little depressed kids, said, you should write your happy thoughts down in this happy book. My grade 8 teacher said, what are you doing? You don't belong in basic. Here's where you belong.
And she checked gifted.
Gifted.
Yeah. And then you spent high school trying to prove her right.
Yeah.
And you did.
She's not with us anymore, but I hope that I did her proud. There was something about her, insistence that I was more capable than I thought I was. So much so to be put in that class, where there might have been 8 or 9 other people. I can't remember exactly right now, but I had to honor that in some way. I felt like a fraud until I started to face my fears head on. The biggest one was the fear of public speaking. Despite that fear, I was so scared. I used to throw up each time, and it mortified me. And I'd think of nothing but that, assignment for months. Tried to avoid every class that required something like that. And then in grade 11, unavoidably, I had to do one, and it went well. And the teacher gave what I
It's
thought
an
was a compliment, and
understatement.
yeah, well,
It
I
went
learned later it's not really a compliment. He said that I was a demagogue, right? And these days, perhaps then too, that's not really a compliment, but the sense that my voice could be influential
yes.
meant that, okay, here's something that's not useless. This is something I can turn into a job, a career, an impact on the world.
Is that what planted the seeds for law?
Yes. I thought there's only two things I can do: law or politics,
Right. And
right?
why law versus politics?
Well, because from what I could tell at 17 years old, those are the only professions that use their voice.
Right. No,
It's
but
clearly
why
not
law?
true.
Why did you end up pursuing law? I know eventually you do pursue politics.
Yeah.
But why law first as opposed to politics initially?
Well, I, as far as I could tell, you don't just go into politics, right? So I thought, everyone I knew at the time that was in politics seemed also to be a lawyer. That's
Okay.
changed quite a bit since then. So I thought, okay, let's try law school, and maybe one day politics will follow.
Right.
But, get the education first. And then there's the whole world of opportunities can follow, only one of which is politics. But I had no reason to believe that I could get into law school. I just saw that as the only way out of Weber Street,
Right.
you know? And that motivated me to try harder, to find a way to study. And largely that meant finding somewhere other than Weber Street where I lived to try to concentrate on classes. Not just classes, but homework. We like today, parents help their kids all the time. Then there's no chance of that. But we live several levels below the poverty line. My mother's income, the whole income for when my at that age was $8,000 for the family. My father moved then to Toronto, gave $60 for the week, would come home on the weekends. Anyway, to make that $8,000, my mother took care of 8 kids, starting at 5 or 6 in the morning, the first 5, and then the second shift would start around 5 at night. So, and this is in a 3-bedroom house. There's no space, to do any work. So I found spaces, and the motivation was there. And while I thought everyone who did well just did it by nature, I realized that for me, I had to work at it. But when I worked at it, there were results, slowly at first, and then more came later. But I also saw there's only one path out of Weber. And for me, that was like, I got to get into the University of Waterloo because I can't afford to live out of town. And I can't afford to pay tuition at the University of Waterloo. So I got to get into their co-op program. The co-op program meaning that I'd have a job every 4 months that would pay for the next 4 months of school. And unless I do that, I'm cooked. Then I'd have to get that violin out and hope for the best, right?
Well, luckily that never happened.
Yeah.
When you start your career in law, what year is it?
Well, I was called in 95.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there any discussion in 1995 around mental health or the mental well-being of lawyers?
I no, I can't remember any.
At the
Uh,
at
yeah.
the time, did you recognize your own depression or symptoms of depression?
I knew that I was depressed, but I didn't have a diagnosis of any kind at that time. And it's interesting now you say that because I was looking back severely depressed in third year of law school during articling, so the year before I started practicing as a lawyer, and several times since. What I wanted to mention was a strange coincidence that made me wish that we did talk about it back then, because when my year as president of the OBA ended in 2015, so what, 20 years after I started law school, I was given an award called the Transforming Lives Award. It was under a big tent, uh, big deal, lots of people. And as I was getting ready to say a few words, I noticed that there was a classmate who had won it a few years earlier, who suffered from depression and other things, who was suicidal, right?
Mm.
At various times in his life. And we sat together in many classes. And I thought how much we could have helped each other if it was just more comfortable to talk about.
Right.
Like if he could have said, "I know what you're feeling. Welcome to my world," as so many have since 2015 or 2014.
Well, thanks in part to a little article you did for the Law Time.
Yeah, well, it, I'm laughing because that uh, not because your comment is silly, but because behind that it was an interview just introducing my term as president and what I wanted to do, but the thinking behind the decision in that interview to disclose that I wanted to work on mental health in the profession and improve it was something that took maybe 2 years to develop the courage and the resolution to pursue.
Right.
I was scared to death doing that. So that depression that you asked about, yeah, by 95, it was settled. And looking back, probably irreversibly so. Still is. But I was certain that if I told anybody about it, my career that was so fragilely accomplished for what it was worth at that time would be put at risk. You're a defense lawyer. You're used to being a warrior for people who have problems that they can't solve for themselves. And you must ask yourself sometimes, would they go to you if they thought you were weak?
Oh, I mean, I thought my career was over when I released my TED Talk, where I refer to my, life as a street junkie. I thought that was it. Done. Never winning a case again, never getting another client again. Close up shop.
And you did it. And
I
why
did.
did you do it? Did you ever?
So when I was I spent law school scared to death that I might say something to reveal what my history was. I had relapsed just before I started law school, and so I spent my first semester of law school uh, quitting drugs, quitting alcohol, quitting everything that my life had been about for just over a dozen years prior to entering law school. And I didn't want anyone to know anything about me at all. And so I tried to sort of water down anything that was any questions of a personal nature. Um, and I promised myself in my, I think, second year that if I could figure out how to be successful as a lawyer, I would be honest about my history because I couldn't find a mentor. I couldn't find anyone that I could look up to. And I knew they existed. I don't think that I'm such an anomaly that there's no, former drug addicts in the legal profession, but everyone was so scared to talk about it, understandably so, and I was among them. And I couldn't find anyone where I could say, "How do you navigate this, unbelievably competitive, demanding profession where every networking event has people, out and drinking and, you know, uh, there's quite a bit of drug use in the profession. And I, needed to avoid all of that, um, in order to try to make my way through. But I didn't have anyone that I could openly talk to, and I couldn't find anyone that was an example where, okay, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. That's all I needed. I wanted
Yeah.
to see that someone
Yeah. Yeah.
had been able to do it, and I couldn't find it. And so I thought if I could figure out how to be successful, I owe it to myself and I owe it to everyone who's sort of coming up, to show that, we can. That was it. It was like, if I can do it, you can do it because I'm not special. And so I needed to, and I knew that at some point I would. I didn't know when that would be. And when I got the opportunity, I was asked to participate, in this TEDx event. And then when my talk got chosen by TED to launch on their YouTube channel, I thought I have to. There are just some opportunities that you don't get again, and you have to see for what they are. And so, but I was scared. I spent the entire day. I think I canceled court, and I was like, I just need to hide from the world because I do not know what is going to come from this. And in the meantime, it's done the exact opposite. It's opened up conversations, and I got a ton of support as you did too.
Yeah, and it's remarkable to me how similar the thought process was. It's like our rationales were born under the same star because for me, I didn't have a mentor either. And as far as I could tell at the time, the lawyers that spoke about it, if there was at least one that I can remember about depression, didn't practice law anymore as a result of it. So that didn't give people the hope that they were looking for. And really, I was waiting for a time where I felt safe in my career, that if I did disclose it, it wouldn't hurt me, or that if it did, I could recover. And somehow, when I became president of the OBA, I'd already practiced law for 20 some years. I thought, will I ever have a better time? And if I don't do it now, then when? I have to do it now. And yeah, I had the same fears and 2 years of it. And then I remember sitting down for the interview and thinking, are you really ready for this?
Did you know, so when you're talking about the 2 years, and for those listening, you were elected as the second vice president,
Yeah. Yeah.
knowing that in 2 years' time you would be the president because you would spend
Yeah.
a year as the second vice president, then a
Yeah.
year as first vice president of the Ontario Bar Association, and then automatically
Yeah.
would earn the top spot as president.
Exactly.
And so when you got elected to be second vice president, did you know, okay, I'm going to use my platform as president in 2 years to open up this discussion?
No, not at all.
Okay.
But I just kept coming back to that. What I did want is to use the year for something meaningful. The constant theme, I think, that I return to. I didn't want to be a custodian, someone who, does no harm, and then leaves. And I couldn't think of what to do that was more important than that. And I kept trying to find it.
Like, anything else? Is there something else?
Give me something, right, to work with here.
Right.
And I could think of nothing else. And so, I said to myself, damn the torpedoes. And if they come for me, I'm going to have to withstand it.
And at the time, you were still a partner of a major corporate law firm, yes?
By then, I was
With
at
the
the Ministry of the Attorney General,
Okay.
doing corporate commercial litigation and eventually Indigenous litigation. So, I was in the public sector and less afraid of, where my work would come from because there was always work there. So, to say that it was brave, I think, is an overstatement because I felt fairly secure in my career and in my job. it just what was afraid of is how I would be treated. I thought, I'm gonna lose the respect of my colleagues. Initially at first, it didn't last long, but the Ontario Bar Association thought, do you really want to say this? Maybe this will hurt our brand. Think about this. It's just a pet project. You're only around for a year. What are you saying about the profession if you say these things?
Right.
I was able to convince them in the matter of days, it seems, in hindsight, that there was a bigger picture to be mindful of, and once I overcame that threshold, they were fully supportive. The unresolved question was still how my family would treat me back home, because I thought they didn't know
Right.
that I had this major depressive illness, or treatment-resistant depression generally, or generalized anxiety. But more
And
importantly, they didn't know I attempted
I was
suicide.
gonna say, they didn't
Yeah.
at that point, they still didn't know that you had suicide
No,
attempts or had been hospitalized for them because
no.
you
I
spent.
was 6 months in the hospital.
Right.
For a
Well,
short time, I
where did
was
they think you were?
well, I told him work's so busy, I can't do anything with the family, and so it caused some anger, resentment, and distrust, I suppose,
Right.
and perhaps rightfully so, but I missed all of the major holidays, Christmas. It happened December 18th, so
Right.
where are you, Christmas Eve and stuff? New Year's, of course, Valentine's Day, not that that's a big deal with my family, but my mother's birthday is right the next day. And then after that, Easter, I was gone for all of that. So I was in the hospital from the 18th of December till I think it was the end of June, right? 1.6 kilometers away from my mother lived. And I was so afraid of telling anyone that I told no one. And so I had no visitors from my family or friends. They learned about it in the paper.
In the Law Times article.
No. What
Oh.
surprised me about all of this is the Toronto Star picked it up
Right.
and put it. I was on the front page under the fold, but also on the back page. And, circulation at that time was, I think, around 800,000. But my daughter, who was in Windsor at the time, I remember calling me and said, "Dad, you ruined my life.
Wow.
How can you say those things? My reputation's ruined."
And yet she was the reason that you even called for help after you swallowed all the pills and swallowed the alcohol.
But she didn't know that,
Right.
right? And she was only 8 at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, back then, she would have been maybe, I don't even know, maybe 14, 15, you know? She's 27 now and understands and is supportive and loving and all of those things, but there's an example of not really thinking things through, I suppose. But it was easier for me to tell a stranger,
Right.
like in an interview, not unlike this, than to tell my family or anyone close to me.
When did you tell your daughter that the thought that prompted you to call for help as you were lying on kitchen floor, overdosed on pills and alcohol, was that you hadn't said goodbye to her? Because it's in the book, so I'm assuming she knows that by now, and I maybe
I
correct me if I'm wrong, did she know that before you put it in the book?
I don't think I ever told her that.
Wow.
I never talked to her about that night, really.
Ever.
Just, that I made an attempt. She learned about that in the
Has she read the
paper.
book?
I don't think she has. In fact, at the outset, you mentioned that it's hard read, right?
It's a very hard read, especially for anyone who's been in a dark place or supported anyone in a dark place, and not it's it's beautifully written. It's so persuasive and precise that there are points where, if anyone's felt darkness, you feel it. You bring the reader into that world in a way that's so necessary and so compelling. But I think for any of us who have, experienced the dark side of life, in our own minds, it's easy to go to that place as you read the book. And that's where I call it challenging, right?
Yeah.
I've had my own struggles with mental health issues when I was young. I've talked about it before. The first time I was institutionalized was the day after I turned 14. So for me, I've been through that in my youth, and then obviously struggled significantly. I turned to drugs. The way that you fell into depression, for me, it was a very deep and intense drug addiction until I was 25, and I've been clean now, coming up on 22 years this week, actually. And so, having spent some time in a dark place in my own mind, yeah, it was easy to go to those places again as I was reading the book. And I think that you bring the reader in such a stark but necessary way that it is a challenging read.
First of all, congratulations on
Thank you.
22 years. That's
Thanks.
that's an enormous achievement,
Thank you.
and you should be so proud of that. Uh, I hope that I didn't miss the mark with the book because I know it's a hard read, and I've tried to introduce some lightness in it, in addition to the hope. But I've heard others say that, and that they read it in chunks.
Yes.
Others can just rip through it in 4 hours, right?
Right.
But the people who know me the best find it hardest to read.
Right.
And in fact, my family hasn't looked at it at all.
Okay.
So my daughter doesn't yet know
Wow.
that she was the reason I'm alive, that it was because I thought of her and I hadn't said goodbye, and that made me want to, you know, reach out to somebody,
Right.
that's why I'm alive. When she brings herself to reading the book, at some point she'll learn that, and I hope that that'll help convey the enormous amount of love I have for her in some small way.
Why now? Why did you decide to write this book now? Is it for you? Is it for something that you see in the profession, in the community? Like,
I always thought that there was a book there that I should try to bring out of me, but I didn't know really. First of all, I didn't think anyone would care enough. Like, I told my story enough times that I was thinking, everyone knows it anyway, so why would I write about it? Um, so
and at least from the times that you mentioned in the book, every time you spoke to a different audience, you had people lined up to come and speak to you,
yeah,
whether to thank you, for
yeah,
your courage, or just, coming up to you and saying, "Me too."
yeah. That was always the case,
Right.
right? And I've spoken now hundreds of times, and each time that was the case.
Right.
So I thought, well, it's helping people. It's doing some good. And then if the speech can, maybe a book can. So there was always that idea in me. But it wasn't brought out of me until I was pursued by, Adina Samuels, who was the founder of the publisher,
Okay.
who, prompted me to try. And then once I started, I'd already written a chapter for The Right Not to Remain Silent. It's a collection of stories, I suppose, or essays of lawyers and judges who struggled with various mental illnesses and things. And so, I had thought about it quite a bit. How would I say it? What would I say? But it's only when I started putting pen to paper, if you will, I found I couldn't stop. And it was a cathartic thing for me to do, to try to describe it in a way that, like, she did as part of the prep work before I did anything. Like, she put together some, idea of a blueprint. But she got me to read a book that I'm probably the only one on the planet didn't know existed. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Okay.
And I read that and I thought, this is about the Holocaust and the worst possible situation, and how Frankl drove obtain meaning out of a situation where everything was deprived of him, you know. And what was important, not only in his broader lesson, but was the craft that he used, like how he described the events, separating what happened with from what he felt about what happened. And I thought that was, you know, a powerful tool to use. So that I tried to emulate that as much as I can. You know, I described what happened, but I'll let you feel what you feel.
Right.
And that's where I hope you find yourself, right, in the book.
Think that you are doing an incredible job of using your experience, using your knowledge. You say you're not an expert. I think you're an expert. You may not be a technical expert or an academic expert, but people with lived experiences are experts in their field because they've actually been there. And I think that what you've done with your book, what you've done in your advocacy from the first time you shared your story up until including today and beyond is truly incredible, and it is doing that work. So I want to thank you for your honesty and your courage to be able to put your fears aside and being honest and being public about this because it has been so difficult. And I'm just glad that you were met with the accolades that you were and continue to be met with. Um,
Well, you're so kind, and I'm grateful for all of that. And I want to thank you too for facing your fears and doing that TEDx talk.
Thank you.
You know, you help change the world in a small way,
Yeah, one step at a time.
one step at a time.
Thank you so much, Orlando.
Thank you.
Another episode of Who Judges the Judge. Thank you so much.